The room was too quiet. It was a quiet that felt heavy, like a thick blanket, and it made the girl want to shuffle her feet or tap her fingers just to break it. Sunlight came in through the big window, hitting the shiny black lid of the grand piano and making little dust motes dance in the air. The other children sat very still on their little benches, hands folded in their laps, waiting. They knew the rules. The girl, let's call her Anya, did not feel still. Inside her head, it was never quiet. If she looked at the raindrops on the window, she didn't just see water. She heard a rhythm of fast asterisk pitter-patter asterisk on the leaves, a slow asterisk plonk-plonk asterisk from the gutter, all mixing together into a song. The distant growl of a lawnmower from down the street wasn't just noise. It was a low, grumbling bass note. Her mind was always turning these everyday things into music, a rushing, swirling symphony that no one else could hear. Mrs. Griffith, the piano teacher, sat very straight in her chair. She had a kind face, but it was a face that liked things to be a certain way. Her music books were perfectly neat, and her pencils were always sharp. She believed music was a beautiful language, but it was a language you had to learn properly. Letter by letter, word by word. You started with scales. You learned the notes on the page. You practiced until your fingers did exactly what they were told. No questions asked. Anya, dear, Mrs. Griffith said, her voice smooth as the piano's polish. It's your turn. Let's hear your piece. The piece was for Elise, a beautiful, classic melody by Beethoven. For Anya, the notes on the page looked like tiny, trapped birds. They were supposed to go one way, in a specific order. But when she thought of the music, she didn't think of a sad girl named Elise. She remembered a storm she'd seen last week, the dark purple clouds, the way the wind suddenly roared, the crazy dance of the tree branches. It was scary and exciting and powerful all at once. She placed her fingers on the cool, smooth keys. She played the first few bars correctly. But then, the storm in her mind got louder. The melody felt too gentle, too small, for what she was feeling. Her fingers, trying to be obedient, began to hesitate. Instead of the soft, repeating notes, she hit a lower key a bit too hard. It sounded like distant thunder. A boy in the front row snickered. Mrs. Griffith's smile tightened just a little at the corners. From the top, Anya, remember, it's asterisk piano asterisk soft and gentle. Think of Elise. Think of something delicate. Anya tried. She really did. She shut her eyes, trying to find the delicate thing. But all she found was the memory of the wind. Her right hand tried to follow the storm, playing faster, while her left hand, confused, stumbled over the simple chords. The sounds crashed together, not like a storm, but like two different songs fighting each other. It was a jumble. It was wrong. A full laugh broke out from the boy in the front. Another girl hid her smile behind her hand. Heat rushed to Anya's cheeks, burning and bright. Mrs. Griffith stood up and walked over. She put a gentle hand on Anya's shoulder. Stop, stop. It's all right. Her voice was quiet, but the whole room could hear. The problem, Anya, is you're not listening. You're not listening to the music on the page. You're just making things up. Anya looked down at her lap, at her own small hands that had betrayed her. I was trying to play the storm, she whispered, so quiet only Mrs. Griffith could hear. The storm? Mrs. Griffith asked, kindly but confused. Darling, the piece is for Elise, not for a thundercloud. She gave a little laugh, hoping to lighten the mood. Some of the children laughed with her. Music has rules, Anya. It has structure, like a house. You can't build a house by just throwing bricks anywhere, can you? You have to follow the plan. Anya nodded, but she didn't understand. The music in her head didn't feel like a house. It felt like a wild, living river. The lesson ended. As the other children packed up their books, chatting about the silly mistake, Anya lingered. Mrs. Griffith was writing in her big ledger. She looked up and saw Anya standing there. Yes, Anya? Could I? Anya's voice was a tiny thread of sound. Could I try a different piece? One that's more loud? Mrs. Griffith sighed, a soft, tired sound. She put down her pen. Anya, you have to walk before you can run. You must master the basics first. Your fingers need discipline. Your mind needs to learn focus. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Your report card will say you need to apply yourself more. You have so much energy, but you must learn to channel it. Right now, you're just making noise. The word hung in the air. Asterisk noise asterisk. It was worse than wrong. Wrong could be fixed. Noise was useless. Anya walked home that day, her shoes scuffing on the pavement. The world was full of its own music, the asterisk click dash clack asterisk of a dog's nails on the sidewalk, the asterisk whoosh asterisk of a passing car, the snippets of different songs from open windows. But now, those sounds just felt like proof that she heard things differently, and that different was bad. At dinner, her parents asked about the lesson. They were loving, busy people who wanted the best for her. They saw piano lessons as a key to a good future, to discipline and culture. It was fine, Anya mumbled, pushing her peas around her plate. Her mother looked at her father, a silent conversation passing between them. A week later, the report came in the mail. Her father read it at the kitchen table, his forehead wrinkling. "It says here you're consistently inattentive," he said, his voice tinged with disappointment, "that you resist foundational instruction. Mrs. Griffith recommends we consider if you're truly suited to instrumental study." Her mother sat beside her, a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Oh, sweetheart, are you not trying? Do you not like the piano?" Anya didn't know how to explain. She loved the piano. She hated the lessons. They were two completely different things. Saying it out loud felt impossible, so she just shrugged, a lump in her throat. The whispers followed her, not just from the other kids, but from the adults too. At a school parent-teacher meeting, her mother overheard Mrs. Griffith talking to another teacher. "Such a shame," Mrs. Griffith said, not unkindly. "She has all this restless spirit, but no control. Some children are just not made for structured music. Perhaps she'd be better with a sport." The label, once whispered, became a fact. Asterisk unteachable, defiant, ADAYDREAMER. Asterisk her parents, worried and a little embarrassed by the reports, decided not to renew the lessons for the next term. They told her gently, one evening, that maybe they could try soccer instead. Anya didn't cry. She just felt a hollow space open up inside her chest where the storm music used to be. The piano at home was a silent, dark monument to her failure. She would sometimes walk past the music room door and see the closed lid, and the quiet in the house felt even heavier than the quiet in Mrs. Griffith's studio. It was the quiet of something that was over. The world, it seemed, had agreed. Anya and music were not friends. The hollow feeling didn't go away. It followed Anya like a quiet shadow all through the rest of that year. Her parents signed her up for soccer, just as they'd suggested. She ran up and down the field, her shoes kicking up little puffs of dust. But her heart wasn't in it. The shouts of teammates and the blast of the coach's whistle were just more noise. They didn't turn into a song. They just sounded like people yelling. Then, everything changed. Her grandfather, her father's dad, got sick. Not terribly sick, but sick enough that he couldn't live alone in his big, creaky old house anymore. The family decided to move in with him. It was a practical decision, but for Anya, leaving her familiar neighborhood felt like the world was shifting under her feet. Her grandfather's house was a place of whispers and dust. It smelled of old books, of wood polish, and of the mint candies he always had in his pocket. He was a tall man who had become slightly bent, like a friendly tree leaning in the wind. His eyes were kind and blue, and they watched everything. He didn't talk a lot, but when he did, his voice was slow and warm. Anya was given the small bedroom at the end of the upstairs hallway. It was cozy, with flowered wallpaper that was peeling at the seams. But the real discovery happened on her second day. While she was exploring, at the very end of the hall was a narrow door she hadn't noticed before. It was stuck. She put her shoulder into it, and with a groan of protest, it swung open into darkness. A pull cord dangled from the ceiling. She gave it a tug. A single, bare light bulb flickered on, revealing the attic. It wasn't a scary attic from a storybook. It was a crowded, gentle place, full of forgotten things. Towers of cardboard boxes with labels like Xmas Decorations 92 and baby clothes. An old dressmaker's dummy stood in the corner like a silent ghost. Light filtered in through one small, dirty window, making golden streaks in the dusty air. And there, pushed against the slanted wall under the window, was a shape covered by a dusty white sheet. Curiosity pulled her forward. She reached out and took a corner of the sheet. It came away in a soft asterisk whoosh asterisk, sending a cloud of dust dancing in the sunlight. It was a piano. Not a grand piano like Mrs. Griffith's, not even a nice upright like the one she'd had at home. This was old. The wood was a dark, scuffed brown, and one of its front legs was chipped. The ivory on the keys was yellowed, some of it cracked, and the black keys looked faded. It seemed tired, and very, very forgotten. Hesitantly, she pressed down on a key in the middle. The note that came out was soft, but it was wrong. It was flat and dull. like the piano had a sore throat. She pressed another. It was slightly sharp, a sad, tinny sound. The whole thing was hopelessly out of tune. But to Anya, in that quiet attic, it was the most beautiful sound in the world, because there was no one here to hear it. No Mrs. Griffith with her disappointed smile. No other children to snicker. No parents hoping for a report of progress. It was just her, the dust, and this broken old friend. She pulled over an old, wooden stool that was missing a cushion. She sat down, the stool wobbling slightly under her. She looked at the keys. They weren't a test anymore. They weren't a trap. They were just there. She didn't think about scales. She didn't look for sheet music. She just let her hands rest on the keys, feeling their cool, uneven surface. She closed her eyes and listened to the house. From downstairs, she could hear the faint, rhythmic asterisk click-clack asterisk of her grandfather's knitting needles. Outside the dirty window, a spring rain had just begun. A light asterisk tap dash tapping asterisk on the roof. Her right hand drifted, finding a cluster of high notes. She played them softly, trying to match the rain. Asterisk tap tap tap. Tap dot asterisk, but the rain changed, coming down harder. Her fingers responded, playing faster, a little louder. A random patter that perfectly mimicked the sudden downpour on the shingles. It wasn't a melody. It was a picture. Her left hand joined in, pressing a few of the lower, groaning keys. They sounded like the deep rumble of the house settling, or like distant thunder. The two hands weren't playing a song together. They were having a conversation. The rain spoke, and the house answered with a creak. She lost track of time. She played the sound of her own loneliness from the past few months, a slow, wandering series of notes with no clear home. She played the nervous flutter in her chest on the first day at her new school, a quick, jittery trill high up on the keys. She wasn't asterisk performing asterisk. She was just letting the feelings out through her fingers. The out-of-tune piano didn't judge. It echoed back exactly what she gave it, warped and strange and true. This became her secret. Every day after school, she would finish her homework quickly and then say, "I'm going to read in my room." But she would slip down the hall and into the attic. The ritual was always the same. The tug of the light cord, the dusty sunlight, the gentle unveiling of the piano. She developed a whole physical world up there. She would hunch over the keys, her ear sometimes almost touching them, listening to the vibrations travel through the wood. When the music inside her was big and stormy, her whole body would move with it, her shoulders rising and falling. She would hum along, not with words, just with sounds. Her feet would tap against the rungs of the stool in complex rhythms that had nothing to do with what her hands were doing. It looked strange. It looked chaotic, but it was the only way the music could get out. One afternoon, she was deep in the middle of a particularly loud piece. She was trying to capture the frantic energy of a squirrel she'd seen chasing another across the backyard, a mad scramble of high notes, sudden stops, and playful jumps. She was so lost in it she didn't hear the faint creak of the attic stairs. The music stopped abruptly when she saw a shadow fall across the keys. She spun around, heart pounding, caught it was her grandfather. He stood in the attic doorway, leaning on his cane. He must have heard everything. How long had he been there? Fear shot through her. He would tell her parents. They would think she was being weird, hiding up here making a racket. They would feel sorry that she was still hung up on piano after all the trouble. The old shame started to creep back. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at her, then at the old piano, then back at her flushed, worried face. His expression was unreadable then. He did something surprising. He didn't ask her to play something proper. He didn't sigh. A slow, deep smile spread across his weathered face. It was a smile of recognition. That, he said, his voice a soft rumble in the quiet attic, sounded exactly like that argument those two squirrels were having by the bird feeder. Enya's mouth fell open. How did he know? He took a step closer, his knees cracking. He reached out a bony finger and pressed down on a low, groaning C-sharp. The note hung in the dusty air. "This old thing hasn't had a voice in 30 years, he said. "Not since your grandmother passed. She used to play hymns on it. Simple ones. It was always a bit sour, even then." He patted the side of the piano like it was an old dog. "Seems it just needed the right kind of storm to wake it up again." He looked at her, his blue eyes twinkling. "You carry the weather in you, child. I can hear it. Don't let anyone tell you to put it in a bottle." Then, with another soft creak of the floorboards, he turned and slowly made his way back down the stairs. He didn't tell her to keep it a secret. He didn't tell her to come downstairs. He just let her be. Anya sat in the sudden, profound quiet, his words washing over her. Asterisk the right kind of storm. Asterisk he hadn't heard noise. He had heard the asterisk squirrels. Asterisk. He had understood. For the first time since Mrs. Griffith's studio, the heavy feeling in her chest didn't just ease. It lifted, fluttered, and flew away. She turned back to the yellowed keys. They weren't just keys anymore. They were her translators. And in the safe, dusty secrecy of the attic, with her grandfather listening kindly from below, her private language began to grow from a whisper into a true voice. Years have a way of passing. The girl who scrambled up to the attic after school became a young woman, who moved through the high school hallways with a quiet, observant grace. The noisy restlessness of childhood had settled into something deeper, a current that ran under the surface. On the outside, Anya was just another sophomore, maybe a little quiet, someone you wouldn't look at twice in the crowded cafeteria. But inside, and in the attic, she was a universe. The old piano was more than a friend now. It was her journal, her laboratory, her truest voice. She had learned its every quirk. The F sharp above middle C that always stuck unless you nudged it just so. The low G that had a beautiful, mournful buzz. She didn't fight its out-of-tune nature. She wove it into the music. A feeling of loneliness wasn't just a minor chord. It was that minor chord played on the piano's most sour, whispering keys, making the ache feel real and physical. She had grown, too. Her hands were longer, stronger. The storms she could paint were more complex. She could play the soft, hazy light of a winter morning, or the frantic, joyful chaos of the starlings gathering on the telephone wires at dusk. It was all there, in her head, flowing out through her fingers. It was a language only she and the piano spoke, and her grandfather, listening from his chair by the fireplace downstairs, was its humble and appreciative audience. He was the one who first mentioned the new teacher. It was a Saturday morning, and they were at the local farmer's market, a weekly ritual. Her grandfather was haggling good-naturedly over the price of tomatoes with Mrs. Pulaski, who ran the biggest produce stand and knew everyone's business. And the school finally got a proper music teacher again, I hear, Mrs. Pulaski said, bagging the tomatoes with strong, quick hands. After old Mr. Henderson retired. This one's a fellow from the city, they say. A jazz man. Her grandfather raised an eyebrow. A jazz man here? That's a fish out of water. Double quotes. Mrs. Pulaski shrugged. Maybe, my niece says he's odd. Doesn't make them play those screechy beginner songs. Makes them listen to records. All sorts of strange stuff. She leaned in conspiratorially. He was in here buying apples last week. Asked if any of them were sour. Said he liked a bit of tartness. Odd fellow. Anya kept her eyes on a basket of green beans, but her ears were tuned in. A jazz man. Someone who liked things that were a bit sour. It sparked a tiny, dangerous flicker of curiosity in her chest. She immediately tried to smother it. Teachers were teachers. They had rules. They had plans. They had report cards. A few weeks into the school year, she saw him. He was crossing the courtyard. A tall, lean man with a slightly rumpled look about him. He wasn't old, but he wasn't young either. His face had lines that looked like they came from smiling or squinting at bright lights. Maybe both. He carried a faded canvas bag overflowing with sheet music and what looked like a vinyl record case. His name, she learned, was Mr. Kale. She avoided the music wing entirely. It was a matter of self-preservation. The memory of that heavy quiet in Mrs. Griffith's studio, the heat of shame on her cheeks, was still a tender bruise. She took art class instead, losing herself in the swirl of colors on a page, which felt safer. No wrong notes in a painting, but her grandfather, it seemed, had other ideas. He had never pushed, never pried. But he watched, and he worried. He saw how the music poured out of her in the attic, a beautiful, wild thing with no place to go in the world. He believed every creature needed a path out of its thicket. One Thursday, Anya came home to find her grandfather at the kitchen table with a stranger. No, not a stranger. It was Mr. Kale. He was sipping a cup of tea, his long fingers curled around the mug. The canvas bag was on the floor by his feet. Ah, there she is, her grandfather said, his eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and warmth. This is Mr. Kale, from your school. We had a nice chat at the market today. Double quotes. Mr. Kale stood up. He had a gentle, unhurried way of moving. Your grandfather, he said, his voice a low, warm rumble, has been telling me fascinating stories about the weather in this house. Specifically, the attic kind. Anya felt the floor drop away. She shot a look at her grandfather, who simply smiled and took a sip of his own tea. He had told he had broken the one sacred rule of her private world. Mr. Kale seemed to sense her panic. He held up a hand. He didn't play a recording. He just described it. The sound of arguments between squirrels. The exact pattern of the rain on the roof last Tuesday. He said you have a rare gift for translation. He paused, his head tilted. I'm a translator, too, of a sort. My language is jazz, which, at its heart, is just the sound of a feeling meeting a rule, and them deciding to have a conversation instead of a fight. The words were strange, but they didn't feel like a teacher's words. They felt like a code. I'm not a student in the music program, Anya said quickly, her voice tight. I know, Mr. Kale said. I checked. Your file says not suited for structured musical study. He said it without judgment, as if he were reading a weather report that said chance of rain. He looked at her, really looked. The thing about structures, he continued, is that people forget they can be rebuilt. Sometimes you find a tree growing through an old wall. The tree isn't wrong. Maybe the wall was just in an inconvenient place. He put his mug down. Would you play for me? The question hung in the air. It was the question she had dreaded for years. It was a trap. It was a test. Everything in her screamed to say no, to run to her attic and lock the door. But her grandfather was looking at her with such quiet faith. And this man, he had asked about sour apples. He talked about trees growing through walls without a word. She turned and walked out of the kitchen. She heard the two men get up and follow her. She led them not to the living room, but up the stairs, down the hall, to the narrow attic door. She didn't go in for them. She went in because the piano was the only witness that could possibly explain her. She sat on the wobbly stool. The two men stood in the doorway, shadows in the dusty light. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. This was worse than Mrs. Griffith's studio. This felt like surgery, like opening up her chest. She closed her eyes. She thought of the feeling she'd had just that morning, walking to school. The first real chill of autumn was in the air, and the wind had a new, sharp smell. It was the feeling of endings and beginnings all tangled up, sadness for the dying summer leaves, excitement for the crisp days ahead. It was a bittersweet, windy feeling. Her hands found the keys. She started with a high, repeating pattern in the right hand, light and chilly, like skittering leaves. Her left hand came in with a slower, walking set of notes, the autumn wind pushing at your back. Then, as the feeling built, she let her left hand form a heavy, dissonant cluster of the low, buzzy notes, the groaning end of things. But her right hand fought back with a clear, single melody that rose above it, hopeful and bright, like the sun breaking through gray clouds. It wasn't a song. It had no real beginning or end. It was a 5-minute portrait of a windy autumn morning. When her hands finally fell away, the last of the sour, buzzing chord faded into the attic's silence. She couldn't bring herself to turn around. She stared at the yellowed keys, waiting for the polite cough, the confused thank you, the footsteps retreating down the stairs. What she heard was a long, slow exhale. Wow, Mr. Kale whispered. The word was full of genuine awe, not polite praise. He came and stood beside the piano, not too close. He didn't look at her. He looked at the keys, as if he could still see the ghost of the music there. That cluster you used, he said, pointing to the left-hand section. Those notes, that's what we call an extended minor 11th chord. It's all tension. Its asterisk meant asterisk to sound unsettled. You found it because it asterisk felt asterisk like the feeling. You found the sound of the emotion. He finally looked at her. His eyes were bright, intense. Anya, what's in your head? I can't teach you that. No one can. That's yours. It's a gift. But right now, it's like you're speaking the most beautiful, poetic language in the world, but only to yourself. You have no dictionary, no grammar to share it with others, so they just hear beautiful noise. He crouched down beside the stool so he wasn't towering over her. His voice was earnest. Let me give you the dictionary. Let me show you the names for the storms you're creating. I can show you that the sour note you love and that low G, composers have fought for centuries to use sounds like that. I can show you musicians who built whole careers on painting pictures with sound, just like you do. I can't put your music in a box, but I can help you build a bridge from your world to theirs, so one day, you can invite them over to visit. He wasn't offering to fix her. He wasn't offering to make her correct. He was offering her a set of tools, a translation guide. For the first time, an adult with the word teacher attached to them wasn't seeing a problem to be solved. They were seeing a landscape to be mapped. She looked past him, to her grandfather in the doorway. The old man gave a single, slow nod. Anya looked down at her hands, then back at Mr. Kale. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but underneath it, something else stirred. It was the faint, fragile sound of a lock beginning to turn. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible in the dusty attic. "What's in the dictionary?" The lessons didn't happen in a classroom. They happened in the band room after school, when the echoing halls were quiet, or sometimes, on Saturdays, in the attic itself with her grandfather listening from the stairwell. It was nothing like before. Kale didn't start with a book. He started with records. He brought in an old portable player and vinyl discs with crackly sleeves. He played her a piece by a composer named Debussy. "This is called Clair de Lune. It means moonlight," he said. As the haunting, shimmering notes filled the room, he whispered, "He's not just playing notes. He's painting with sound. He's breaking the rules of his time to show us how moonlight feels. For the first time, Anya heard a kindred spirit in history. She wasn't alone. He played her something wild and clattering called The Banshee by a composer named Henry Cowell, where the pianist used their fists and forearms on the keys. "See," Mr. Kale said, his eyes alive. "He needed the sound of a storm, so he used his whole body. Your squirrel argument? It's not so different." He played Jazz Thelonious Monk, with his jagged, surprising chords that sounded wrong in the most right way possible. "He's talking in his own language," Mr. Kale explained. "He built his own rules. People thought he couldn't play. They just didn't understand his dictionary. It was like being given a secret history. All these people, these explorers, they had felt the weather inside them too, and they had found ways to let it out." Mr. Kale wasn't teaching her to fit in. He was introducing her to her family. Then, carefully, he began to give her tools. He didn't say, "This is the rule," he said, "This is a bridge." When she played a section that sounded like crumbling rocks, he would stop her gently. "That feeling of falling apart. The musical word for that texture is dissonance. Let's look at the notes you used." He'd show her how the intervals clashed, and why that clash created tension. "Now, if you move this note down a half step," he'd demonstrate, "the tension resolves. It gives the listener a place to land. You can choose. Do you want them to feel unsettled forever? Or do you want to give them relief?" He taught her chord names not as boring facts, but as colors on a palette. "That sad, hollow sound you love, that's a minor seventh. That big, angry cluster you hit when you're frustrated, that's a dense polychord. You've been speaking in paragraphs. I'm just giving you the punctuation." For the first time, the chaos in her head began to have maps. The storm had names for its winds, arpeggio, glissando, dynamics *. She learned to control the volume, to go from a whisper pianissimo to a roar fortissimo with intention, not just emotion. She started to think about the shape of her pieces, not as a straight line, but as a story with a beginning, a middle where things got complicated, and an end that brought a feeling, if not always a happy resolution. Her playing changed. It was still hers, still the wild, emotional translation of the world, but now it had a spine. It had moments of silence that held weight. It had crescendos that took your breath away because they were built, not just exploded. This went on for months. It was the happiest, most absorbed she had ever been. Then, Mr. Kale brought a flyer to one of their sessions. It was for the annual spring showcase. A glossy, formal-looking thing with a picture of a grand piano. It was the biggest event of the school's music program, where the top students performed polished concertos and sonatas for an audience of parents and teachers. "I want you to audition for this," he said. Simply, Anya stared at the paper as if it were a snake. The memory of the last audience, the stifled laughs, the heat in her cheeks, flooded back. "No," she said, the word immediate and sharp. "I can't. That's for them. The real musicians. You are a real musician," he said, his voice firm but kind, more real than half the kids who will play perfectly recited poems. "You have something to say. This is a place to say it. I'll freeze. Or I'll make noise. They'll think you're crazy for putting me in." "Let me worry about that," he replied. He had a determined set to his jaw she hadn't seen before. "You will play one of your own pieces. The one you've been working on, Attic Thunder. We'll shape it together. Not change it, just focus it." The idea was terrifying, but a tiny, rebellious part of her, the part that had grown strong in the attic, wondered what it would be like to play her storm on a grand piano, on a stage, for people who had never heard rain in the walls. Kale submitted her name. The earthquake happened the next day. He was called into the office of the head of the music department, Mrs. Dillard, a stern woman who had been at the school since forever. Rumor was she had been a friend of Mrs. Griffith, Anya's old teacher. Anya heard about the meeting in hushed, excited whispers in the hallways. "He's in trouble," a girl from the choir said. Mrs. Dillard was shouting about standards. Later, Mr. Cale found her at her locker. His face was calm, but there was a tightness around his eyes. "There's going to be a formal audition panel," he told her. "For you, tomorrow after school. They want to assess your suitability." The panel was in the main music room. Sitting behind a long table were Mrs. Dillard, the stern band director, and to Anya's sinking horror, Mrs. Griffith, who gave her a tight, polite smile of recognition. Mr. Cale stood by the window. "Play Attic Thunder," he said softly. "Just like we practiced." Anya's hands were ice. This was worse than any childhood lesson. These were the judges of the musical world, the keepers of the rules. She began. She tried to play the focused, shaped version she and Mr. Cale had worked on. But the fear was a clamp around her heart. The opening, meant to be a soft, mysterious rumble, came out shaky and weak. When she hit the first big dissonant cluster, the sound of the attic's groan, Mrs. Dillard visibly winced and made a note on her paper. Mrs. Griffith sighed. A soft, familiar sound that sent Anya tumbling back 10 years. She stumbled through to the end. The silence that followed was worse than any criticism. Mrs. Dillard cleared her throat. "Mr. Cale, while we appreciate your inclusive spirit, the showcase is a celebration of excellence and disciplined achievement. What we heard today is avant-garde at best, and at worst, a series of discordant accidents. It is not suitable for our audience, which expects *music*. Mr. Cale stepped forward. "With respect, it is music. It's just music you don't have a frame for yet. This isn't a frame issue," the band director said. "Not unkindly, it's a fundamentals issue. She lacks basic technical control." Mrs. Griffith finally spoke, her voice dripping with a sad, false kindness. "Anya, dear, we tried with you. Some minds just aren't wired for performance. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Perhaps composition, in a few years, with a lot of study." Her voice trailed off, dismissing the idea. The verdict was clear. Anya gathered her sheet music, the notes she barely needed, with trembling hands, humiliation burning her from the inside out. She fled the room. She didn't go to the band room the next day, or the day after. She went straight home, straight to the attic, and played in a furious, angry torrent. The music jagged and hot with tears. Her grandfather listened to the tempest from below, his face etched with worry. Mr. Cale came to the house 2 days later. Anya refused to come down. He spoke to her grandfather on the porch. Through her window, she could hear snippets. "Fought for you. A special dispensation. One chance." Her grandfather came up later, moving slowly on the stairs. He sat on an old trunk. He went to the school board. He said quietly, "Made a case. Argued that art is about voice, not just virtuosity. They've agreed to let you perform." Anya shook her head, her face buried in her arms. "I don't want their pity spot." "It's not pity," her grandfather said. "It's a battlefield. He stuck his neck out for you. He believes in your voice so much he's risking his own reputation." He put a gnarled hand on her shoulder. "The world will always have people who only hear noise, child. But that doesn't mean you stop speaking your truth. It just means you have to speak it louder, for the ones who are waiting to hear it." Downstairs, Mr. Cale had left a note with her grandfather. It said only, "Play it for the squirrel. Play it for the rain. Play it for the attic. Forget the panel. Play it for you." The hollow fear was still there, a cold pit in her stomach. But now it was mixed with something else, a fierce, protective fire. This wasn't just about her anymore. Mr. Cale had built a bridge for her. Her grandfather had always been her sanctuary. They were both standing on it now. She couldn't let it collapse. She wiped her face. She went to the old, out-of-tune piano. She placed her hands on the keys, not to rage, but to remember. She played the first notes of Attic Thunder, slowly, clearly, feeling the story in her bones. The fear didn't leave, but it was now joined by a steely, quiet resolve. She would walk onto that stage, not as a girl trying to prove she was good enough, but as a translator, ready to speak her world into the silence. Let them hear noise. She would know it was a storm. The night of the spring showcase arrived, and the school auditorium hummed with a different kind of electricity. It wasn't the excited buzz before a storm. It was a polite, expectant murmur. Rows of chairs were filled with parents in their best clothes, younger siblings squirming in their seats, and teachers wearing tight smiles of professional pride. The air smelled of floor polish and faint perfume. Backstage was a world of whispered scales, the squeak of violin bows on rosin, and the nervous flutter of sheet music. Students in black pants and white shirts or simple dresses moved like ghosts, their faces pale under the harsh work lights. Anya stood apart, near a heavy velvet curtain that smelled of dust. She wore a plain, dark blue dress her grandfather had helped her pick out. The color of deep water, just before night, he had said. She felt like she was drowning in it. In her mind, she wasn't in a school. She was in the attic. She was feeling the wobble of the old stool. She was listening for the rhythm of her grandfather's knitting needles from the floor below, her anchor. But the sounds here were all wrong. The tinny echo of a flute, the stern voice of Mrs. Dillard giving last-minute instructions. Each one was a hook, trying to pull her back into the panic. She peeked through a gap in the curtain. The panel was there. In the front row, Mrs. Dillard, back rigid, Mrs. Griffith, sitting with perfect posture, a program on her lap. Her parents were there too, faces pinched with a worry they were trying to hide. They had come to support her, but she could see the doubt in the way her mother kept twisting her program. They were braced for embarrassment, for a final confirmation of all those old reports. Mr. Kale found her. He wasn't in a tuxedo like some of the other teachers. He wore a simple, slightly rumpled dark suit. He didn't offer empty comfort. He handed her a single, small object. It was an old, slightly dented tuning fork. "When the world gets too loud," he said, his voice low and steady, "and the room feels like it's shrinking, hold this. Press the stem to the bone behind your ear. It hums a pure A for 140 vibrations per second. It's the note every orchestra in the world tunes to. It's the one true thing in all the noise. Remember, you're not tuning yourself to them. You're reminding yourself that your truth has a frequency, too. Now, go translate." Before she could thank him, the stage manager was hustling her towards the side of the stage. A polished middle schooler was finishing a cheerful, tinkling sonatina. The applause was generous, warm. The boy bowed, grinning with relief. The announcer, a senior from the drama club, stepped to the microphone. "And now, a unique addition to our program, performing an original composition. Please welcome Anya." There was no on piano, no explanation, just her name, hanging in the air. The applause was polite, but thinner, confused. She walked out of the wings into the blinding glare of the stage lights. The grand piano was a giant, black, glossy beast. It was everything her attic piano wasn't. Perfect, in tune, imposing. It felt like a stranger. She could make out the first few rows of faces, a sea of blurred expectation. Her legs felt like water. The fear was a live wire in her chest, crackling, threatening to shut her down. She sat on the bench. It was firm, unyielding. The keys were pristine, cold and unfamiliar under her fingertips. A tremor started in her hands. She heard a faint, muffled cough from the audience. The silence grew heavier, waiting for her to fail. Then, her fingers closed around the tuning fork in her pocket. She drew it out, and with a movement hidden by the curve of the piano, she struck it against her knee and quickly pressed the stem to the spot behind her ear. A pure, clear hum filled her skull. Ah! It was a lifeline. In that vibration, she heard the single, true note at the heart of everything. The chaos in her mind stilled for 1 second. In that second, she didn't see the audience. She saw the small, dirty window of the attic. She felt the wobble of her stool. She heard the first drops of a sudden rain hit the roof. Tap. Tap dash tap. Her head, almost unconsciously, dipped closer to the keys, the way it did at home. Her shoulders rounded. She was no longer on a stage. She was in her sanctuary. Her right hand moved, not to play a melody, but to trace the pattern of the rain. A few high, isolated notes, soft as mist. Pianissimo. Then a few more, closer together. Then a sudden, scattered run down the keys, a downpour finding its rhythm. It was simple. It was just rain. Then her left hand descended, not with a chord, but with a low, rolling grumble. It was the sound of the old house settling, of distant thunder, of loneliness. It was the dissonance Mrs. Dillard had winced at. But now, it wasn't an accident. It was a choice. It was the foundation. The two hands began to speak to each other. The rain grew frantic, nervous, the sound of her first day in this very school. Lost and scared. The left hand answered with a heavy, repeating pattern. The weight of every label she'd ever been given. Unteachable, defiant, noise. The music wasn't pretty. It was tense, clashing, full of unresolved friction. In the front row, she saw Mrs. Griffith shift in her seat, a slight frown on her face. But Anya was gone. She was riding the storm. She moved into the heart of attic thunder. Her left hand formed those complex, clanging clusters Mr. Kale had called polychords, the sound of frustration boiling over. But now, her right hand fought back with a single, clear, soaring line of melody that wove through the chaos. It was the voice of the attic. It was the sound of discovery, of a secret friendship with a broken piano. It was hope. She used the tools. She took the tension and, with a masterful shift Mr. Kale had shown her, resolved it into a moment of breathtaking, quiet beauty, a simple, perfect major chord that hung in the air like a shaft of sunlight through the dust. It was the sound of her grandfather's smile from the doorway. The piece built, not in a straight line, but in waves. It had whispers and roars. She used the whole piano, from the deepest, growling bass notes to the highest, shimmering whispers at the top. Her body moved with the music not for show, but because it had a slight sway with the rhythm, a lean into a powerful crescendo. It was the physical language of her attic, brought into the light. For the finale, she brought back the rain theme and the thunder theme, but now they were intertwined, no longer fighting. They were part of the same weather system. They built together, louder and louder, a tremendous, roaring cascade of sound that wasn't chaos, but powerful, controlled release. And then, with one final, decisive movement from both hands, she landed on a final, complex chord. It was neither purely happy nor sad. It was rich, resonant, complete. It was the sound of a soul saying, asterisk, this is me, asterisk. The last note vibrated through the grand piano, through the floor, and into the silent, stunned auditorium. Enya's hands fell into her lap. The blinding glare of the lights came back. The world rushed in. For 3 full seconds, there was absolute silence. It was the deepest quiet she had ever heard, heavy with something she couldn't name. Then, from the front row, a sharp, scraping sound. Mrs. Griffith was on her feet. Her eyes were wide, glistening. Her program had fallen, forgotten, to the floor. She was not smiling. She looked utterly shattered, as if a wall inside her had crumbled. She began to clap. Not a polite pattering, but strong, firm, resonant claps that echoed in the hush. It was a signal. It broke the spell. The band director stood up next. Then a row of parents. Then another. Like a wave, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. The sound that filled the space was not just applause. It was a roar. It was a physical thing. A wall of respect and awe that hit Anya like a warm wind. She saw her parents, both standing, her mother crying openly, her father's face alight with a stunned, proud joy he had never worn before. Kale stood at the side of the stage, his arms crossed, nodding slowly. He wasn't clapping. He was just watching her, a deep satisfaction in his eyes. Asterisk, you see? Asterisk, his look seemed to say. Asterisk, you spoke, and they understood. Asterisk. Anya stood up, her legs unsteady. She looked out at the sea of standing people, at the teachers who had dismissed her, at the peers who had never noticed her. She didn't smile a triumphant smile. She simply bowed, once, deeply, from the waist. It was a bow of thanks to the piano, to her grandfather, to Mr. Kale, to the storm inside her that had finally found its voice. As she walked off the stage, the roar still washing over her, the fear was gone. In its place was a quiet, steady hum, like the note from the tuning fork. It was the sound of a bridge, finally crossed, and a world that was now just a little bit bigger, ready to hear whatever she played next.